Hello, aspiring developers. Welcome back to today's session. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to learn about how we can handle events in JavaScript. From the previous video, we left off that from a button that we should have used to add elements to our DOM, but now we want to use the event listeners to implement that functionality. So if you're interested in that, let's dive right in.
To select an attribute with an ID. We also use the get element by tag name to select a tag name, and we also learned of the .create element to create HTML elements using JavaScript, and the .remove to remove elements using JavaScript. So now we're also going to learn about event listeners. So event listeners, and you can think of it as clicking is an event. When you click your mouse, that's an event. Right click, left click, double click, when you wheel up the mouse, when you tap the keyboard, when you hover over something, all those are events. But we can start with the event listener for this button, because that's what we said we'll tackle in this video. So you can change this side item to add list, because we only want to add a list. Okay, so we want such that when this add list button is tapped, first you can just alert a message to the console, so you know that you must use the button. First you call that variable that you want to edit, and then you use the okay. I'm trying to do away with this hovering text here. We use the add event listener, function when you want to add an event, when you want to listen to an event that occurs on our website. So the event that we're listening it on a specific element. So we are listening for a click event on the element button. So here you'll just say button, then add event listener, and when you call the add event listener method, you need to pass in the event that you want to listen. So you can see that we have several events here. We have the about animation cancel, the animation start, you see the on can play, you can see the on change, the on click is here. You see the on copy, you see the copy, you see the double click, the drag start. All these are events that can be listened and handled by some functions. So the event that you want to listen to this time is the click event. And once you have listened to the event, now what do you want to do next? So you want to handle that event by maybe passing a function, or doing some operations. So because it's about adding, you can just call a function add. So when it's clicked, it should call a function add. So now let's initialize that function, that add function. So you just say function add, and this function, for now we can just alert button has been clicked. Button has been clicked. Yeah, so now here we have selected our button element, and we've passed an add event listener method, which checks for the event click, or rather checks for the click event, and it handles that event by passing the function add. So anytime that button is clicked, then it calls the add function, and here our add function simply alerts button has been clicked. So now if we look at our browser, we're going to see how this event has been handled. So let's head over to our browser. Yeah, you remember this browser from the previous video where we edited this first paragraph. We edited the text content, and we also styled it by increasing the font size and the style color. So this add list button, I know you remember it from the previous video. If not, you can just watch it. So if you tap on it, now you're going to see an alert message saying the button has been clicked. So clicking is the event, and this is the handling of that event So you remember we passed a function, and the function was called add, and it was alerting button has been clicked. So now we can just go back to our browser and to our Visual Studio Code and see how we can now add maybe a list element once the button has been clicked. So let's head over to that place. Now we have confirmed that our add function is being called, and the alert also happens once the button has been clicked. So now let's just do some proper handling of that event. So we want such that when the button is clicked, it creates a new li element, because we said the button text says we are adding a list. So currently, you know that for you to create an element, you need to call the dot create element, but first you need a parent. So our parent will still be the ul element. We already have it here. We've already selected the ul tag, and now we want to add elements into that ul. So we also have this li. Where is it? We don't have any. Okay, we can just initialize a variable to add an item. So you can say let new li, and we pass in the document dot create element. Pass in the document dot create element, and we are creating an element of li. So we already have this ul selected, so we can just append. So you remember, for us to append, first you have to call the parent, then you say dot append child, and inside that dot append child method you pass in the child that you want to append. So in our case it's the new li. But first, before we append it, let's just add some text. So we can say new li, and you say dot, you can say new li dot inner text, and we pass in the inner text as something like this is our new list item, because this button is adding a list item. So now simply what you're doing is saying that when this button is clicked, it should call the add function, and the add function is creating an element list, and then it adds text to that list saying this is our new list element, this is our new list item, and then we append that new list item to the parent element, which is in our case the ul. So we can just save this code, and then we see how all that works on the browser. Yeah, so now when you tap on the add list item, you notice that we have a new list being appended to our lists. So if you tap it again and again, you see that we're having several other lists being appended just below our previous lists. So this list was earlier styled by CSS. I believe I don't know if I showed that to you in the previous video. So if you inspect it and you go to CSS styles, you'll see that the list, or is it the ul? Yeah, you see that the not ul specifically, but the li. See that the li has been styled. We've passed some border, some background color, some margin, and some padding, and you have the style as inline block. And that's where we have our lists in that manner. So if you refresh the browser, you notice that all of them have been removed from our website. You remember that we said DOM handles only the current change, or rather the in-memory change, and it is temporary. So now if you want these DOM changes to be permanent, all you have to do is you need to add whatever is being passed here to the local storage, or you can pass in, because we're not having any backend code, you can just pass it to the local storage. And when you look at these tabs here in the developer tools, you have this application place, and in the application you see there is this thing called the local storage. So later when you learn about local storage, you're going to see how when you add these items, they can be added to the local storage, and when you refresh, they can be maintained on the website. But for now, because we're only learning about event listeners, we'll leave it at that. Yeah, so now let's cement our understanding of event listeners. And just here we have another ID with a div container, another div with the ID container, which has an image. We can also look at the dot replace before we handle the events. Dot replace is also a method that you can use to replace an element. We only tackled how to add an element, that is the dot create element. We also tackled the dot remove element. Now you want to also tackle the dot replace element such that we replace the value of this image. Currently, it's that white car that we saw from our browser. But now we can add another button and say replace image. So this replace image button, we want to add an event listener such that when you click the replace image button, this one will change from a white car to another image that we'll select here, this img.png. So let's go to JavaScript and cement our knowledge on adding event listeners. So you already know that for you to add an event listener, you first have to start by selecting that button. So you can pass in an ID to this button. Just say ID equals, you can say replace image. Then you come to JavaScript and say let button equals document. You remember selecting, we use the dot get element by ID, and there we can say replace image. Button cannot be redeclared. So we already have button. Okay, we can use btn because this is just a variable name. It is not specific to whatever you want to pass. So you can use btn. So let btn equals document dot get element by ID replace image. So we have already selected this button element. So now let's add an event listener to the button element. And the event listener, we can add, we'll still add the click event listener. So we'll just say btn dot add event listener dot add event listener. And the event listener we're adding is the click event. And when that event is clicked, we want to handle it using a next image. Using a replace image function. Yeah, so now let's define this replace image function that we're going to handle. And just say function replace image. Okay, function replace image. Yeah, that's it. Then now we want to replace the image. Currently, this is our image, the image.png, but we want to replace it to img.png. So we're going to use the dot replace. We can just declare another image. So let new image. And then you say, yeah, we have declared let new image. Then you can say now new image dot src equals img dot png. So here we have our new image, and we are passing the source as img.png. So here you can just come and say we are replacing this initial image, or we also call it img. Okay, this is the variable name, so img. Just come and say function replace image, and you say img dot
replace child. First, you remember that for create and remove, we were using the parent element to add or remove a child. So same as replace, you also have to use the parent element to replace the child elements. So the parent element was the parent element where we appended the image. Okay, we haven't selected the parent element yet. So let's just select the parent element. You can say I can add an ID and say parent div. Then we select this ID so that we can replace its image with a different image. Yeah, so you say let parent div equals to document dot get element by ID, and you pass in parent div Yeah, so we have already selected the parent, and now when you want to replace, you have to call the parent. So say the parent div, and the parent div is the one that we'll call the dot replace child. And here the child that you're replacing is this image. So you're replacing this image. So you pass in whatever you're replacing. Dot replace child. So here the first child that you're passing is the new one that you want to put, which is the new image. So the new image. This is the new child that you want to pass. And the one that you want to replace is this old, this image, the previous image with the img variable. So you pass in the old image or the one that you want to replace. So this will replace the image with the new image. So that's how the dot replace works. But you remember that we had some styling for our image. You can just copy this styling once again and add that styling to this new image. But this is new image, so you just use the new image. Say new image. Yeah. Such that also the new image is styled just as the previous image. So now let's head over to the browser and see that the change that we make, such that when you click the button replace image, it handles the click event by calling the replace image function. And the replace image function simply calls the parent function and asks that parent to replace the child node new image with the current existing one, which is img. So the existing image was this white car with some dark background, but you notice that the image has not been replaced. So when you click on the replace image, you see that it's not being replaced. Okay, let's head over to the console. You see that it cannot access the parent div before initialization. Oh, we also have not set the src attribute of the new image. So let's correct those two errors. So the first error was cannot set the src to an non-existing image. Oh, okay. Here we set a new image, but we did not create this image. So you just use the document dot create element, and the element you're creating is the img. Yeah. So now we have an img tag where you can pass in the source attribute and pass image.png, and you also have all those styling for that image, such that you call the parent div and you replace the child new image with the image. The second error was that the parent div cannot be accessed. But where was the error? Div id container id. Oh, sorry, you cannot have two id attributes. So if you have the container id, you can now use class name here instead. So you can say class parent div. Then here you can change from get element by id to get elements by class name. parent div, but you know that will return an array, so you have to use parent div. Parent div equals parent div. Equals parent div, but now the first element of the array. You know the first element is accessed using the 0, which is which tells us that arrays are 0 indexed. So now we can go back to our browser and see whether our replace image button does this replacement of images. So now if you refresh the browser, you notice that there is no error. If you tap on the replace image button, I hope you can see it down here. When you tap on this replace image button, you see that it replaces the image. But when you try tapping it again, you notice that nothing happens. So if you refresh the browser, it goes back to the previous state, because you said that you have to save these settings in local storage, because DOM only changes the memory, the in-memory codes. It does not do the permanent change to the HTML, but instead the in-memory. So when you tap the replace image, you see that our image is replaced. So again, when you just tap the replace image, the image has been replaced. So that is how the replace child works, or rather the replace element. So the next thing and the last thing that you can do for today is how to maybe pass. Now that you have an image, now you can use a button to tap next image and previous image. So let's head over to our browser, to our Visual Studio Code, and see how we can implement that on our website. So now to handle the last part of today's session, we want to handle such that when you click on a button, it goes to the next image, and when you click again, it goes to the previous image. So let's just add two buttons. Here we have the button replace image, but instead I'm going to, okay, I can just create another one, no problem, button. And I'm going to pass the ID of next image, and also the text next image. Then I can have a last button here, button, button, pass the ID of previous image, and then the text will also be previous image. Yeah, but we want to have this above the other one, because it's previous then next. So now let's select these buttons from our JavaScript file. Just come and say let say let let we can say btn. One will be next and one will be previous, but what we want to do is just document dot get element by id, and then we're going to pass the id of that button. So here, but let's use let is okay. Can say btn next, and get element by id. The id here was next image, so we just get element by id next image. Then here we can say btn previous, and you just use prev. Then here we get element by id previous image. So previous, so that is spelling previous image. Yeah. So we have already selected our two buttons. Now we can add event listeners to those buttons. So we can just say btn next dot add event listener dot add event listener. The event is still the click, and we want to call the function next. And for btn prev, we can say btn prev dot add event listener dot add event listener. The event is still click, but now we want to call the function. Previous. Yeah, so let's initialize these functions next and previous. Next, and we have another function, we've called it previous. Okay. So we have two functions, next and previous. We just want to implement such that next will call, remember we have two images, so next will call the next image in line and previous will call the previous image in line. So what you can do, okay, we can have all these images in an array. You can just say var image array, var image array equals, and we pass in those images. We have img and new img, or rather you can just directly pass them in. We have image and img, so you can pass in image.png and the img.png. Yeah, so our array has the two images that we have on our folder, in our folder. So the next thing we want to do is we want to pass these images to these functions anytime we call them. So you can just declare a variable first num. You remember about block scope and function scope, so that's why we're using var, so that this can be accessed locally, sorry. So function next, it can take the variable num and say num will increment. When you call next, it will increment the value of num. Then you can just pass in a condition and say if, or rather you can pass in a loop. Do you pass in a loop or a condition? Okay, you just want to test whether num is greater than or equal to the image array dot length, and if that is true, we can pass in the image source. For us to pass in the image source, we first have to know the value of num, or rather, if this is true, the new value of num. So we can just set the new value of num back to 0. Then we can now pass in the source, because here we have the source. You can just say the new image will be selected. There was a blank image here with the ID image, and I believe we selected that blank image, so we have it as img. So you can just come and say here img dot source will be equal to, now you pass in this source from the array, from the image array. So you can just say img.source is equal to images array, but now you pass in the index, and the index in our case here is the num. So you can use num to test the index. So if num is 0, it will pass in the first ID. If num is 1, it will pass in the second, the source of the second image in the array. So let's just save this function, and we implement this next. Then we can come and check on how to implement the previous. So let's head over to our browser. Yeah, so here you notice that, we have our three buttons: the replace image, the previous image, and the next image. So you remember about the replace image, but you remember it was not working when you try and press it continuously. So if you refresh, this is the initial image. So now if you tap on next image, it will go to the next image. When you tap on next image again, it will just continue iterating over the array. But because currently we only have two images, only two images will be displayed. We can just maybe browse for another image. Say which image? I can say another car image. You can use this brown car.
You can just copy the link, the image address. Where is the image address? Copy the link address. Okay, but the link address will not open the image. Instead, I want the image. Okay, let's copy the image address for this car. And now we have another image. We can add this third image to our Visual Studio Code and see how it works. For now, the previous image button does not work, so let's implement this functionality of the previous image. Yeah, so we can add a third image to this image array, but that was the link for the link we copied. Yeah, so now we have 3 images in our array, such that I want us to see when we tap the next, it goes to the next, and when we go to previous, it goes to the previous one. So for the function previous, we'll do almost the same thing with the next, but now instead of incrementing, we'll be decrementing num, the value of num. Then here you'll come and say if num is greater than 0, because we are decrementing, you can just pass in. First, we are going to pass in the img source, img.source equals image array, then you pass in the num, but that should be outside the if statement. So now let's see how we can handle this this num. You can just say that our new num will be equal to the length of our array. So the length of our array can be 3, so you can just say image array, you can just use the dot length property, but you know that arrays are 0 indexed, but the dot length is counting from 1. So for us to access the including the first image, you have to pass the -1 to access the 0 index. So let us just go to our browser and see this in action. Yeah, so now in our browser we are going to test the next image. So if we tap on next image, it goes to that second image in the array. Next goes to the third image in the array, and next we'll go to back to the first image of the array, because we said that if it is greater than or equal to, it should increment. Then the previous image, okay, the previous image does not work. Let us debug this previous image. Oh, okay, we were testing if num is greater than 0, but for the previous we should be testing if num is less than 0. Yeah, because when we're incrementing num, we test whether it is greater than or equal to, but when we are decrementing, we test whether it is less than. Yeah, so this was the error, the condition. The condition was the error here. So let's save this and go back to our browser and see the corrected change. Yeah, you can just close this first. Okay, so when you tap on previous image, yeah, it calls the previous image function. Next image calls the next image function. So you see that this is the next one, but the previous one is the previous white car, and the next one is this white car. So previous image will go back in the array. It will go back one step. Next image in the array will go forward one step. But if it finds it to be greater than, normally usually it is greater than, we initialized num to be 0, so you have to remember that. Then we set num being equal to 0, such that when you have completed all the images, now when you tap on it and it increments to maybe 4 and there is no image 4 in the array, that condition will be false and it will not be called, but instead num will be reinitialized to 0. That's why you see that when you reach the last document and tap on next, it returns us to the first one. So the same way with the previous image, when you tap on previous image, it will just go to the previous, but when it is less than 0, then it will call the last element in that array, images.length, then -1 to mean the last image in the array. Yeah, so that's how the previous works and the next works. So you've learned how to at least change these images, but manually by tapping on buttons. Next, when we learn animations, we can also learn how to change these images, but now without tapping on the buttons, instead just using the animated images. So they just slide in and slide out. So for the next video, we are going to check on animations using JavaScript. Hope the session was interesting. If at all something is unclear, just use the comment section and we'll gladly respond to your issues. If you have any interesting ideas, you can also pass them to us and we'll appreciate. That's it for today's video. Have a happy coding week.